Welcome to our next episode of Chris's Classic Cinema. My name's Chris Wired, and this is my good friend.
Hello, I'm Jacob, back as always.
So last time, we did movies from Sesame DeMille. This time, we're going into the 1970s, which was with what was possibly the most popular fad in the movie genre of that time. Now, before Star Wars and Jaws placed the fad for blockbusters, there was disaster films. Now, when it comes to disaster films, they all have the same basic storyline. There's a conflict going on that puts people in danger. We get like backstories of certain characters, and then we have to figure out which one of them is going to die or survive. Place your bets.
That I didn't do. I didn't do that part.
Yeah, well, we're going to try to avoid spoilers to tell you like which people make it or not.
Sure, that I can do. That I can do.
Yeah. Now, when it came to the disaster genre, it covers many things. We'll be doing with airplanes in trouble, sinking ships, buildings on fire. But there were other disaster films of that time too. Like there's this whole movie based on the Hindenburg.
There's also Earthquake.
Yes.
Earthquake was a pretty big blockbuster hit at the time.
Yeah, famous for its surround sound that made seats shake.
Mm-hmm.
There was also there was others like Meteor.
There's also several nuclear films that deal with the nuclear atom bomb. There's a couple movies in that kind of spectrum.
Yeah.
Tons of different disaster movies.
And you can thank these films for the parodies like Airplane.
Yeah, and you can also thank these movies for the second wave of disaster films that were natural disaster films in the late 90s.
Yeah, like Titanic, Volcano.
Twister.
Yeah. So with that said, we're gonna start off with the first film that started it all. We're going back to 1970 with the film adaptation of Arthur Haley's best-selling book, Airport. During a Chicago snowstorm at an airport, the manager has to do everything he can to keep order, especially when he finds out that there's a guy on a plane that sets to blow it up so he can give his wife insurance. Along with that, he has to deal with other things too, like he having a bad relationship with his wife. He has to deal with a stowaway that keeps sneaking out.
Not to mention the stuck plane in the taxi on one of the big runways, one of the two big runways.
Yeah. Now, this was the film that started the disaster fad of the 70s. And I gotta say, I can definitely see why.
Mm-hmm. It's definitely a big showstopper. What I really liked about it was how high energy it was. Well, not high energy, but just like the tension building. There was a lot of really good tension building throughout the movie, but that's going into the...
As well as character building, too. I mean, you see how the manager is dealing with all the stuff that's going on. Mm-hmm. You also see his assistant that he seems to be having a relationship with.
Of some sort. It's heavily implied, but it's never really fully developed.
Yeah, he's struggling with his wife. They're on the verge of a divorce.
Yeah, and not only that, but you also have a bunch of other side characters as well. My favorite of which was played by Kennedy, who was the leading airport mechanic.
Oh yeah. Another thing, when it came to these movies, they had a lot of Oscar winners, and this movie had a good amount. There was Burt Lancaster as the manager, George Kennedy as Joe Petroni, Helen Hayes as the stowaway, and I gotta say, these characters are really good.
Yeah, you even have a few side characters as well that were also very familiar faces, like that one secretary from not Ironside, the other guy.
I wouldn't know. Anyway, when it came to, there was also some other side stories as well, like the manager's brother-in-law is having an affair with one of the stewardesses.
Yes.
And they find out that...
Dean Martin.
Yes. Dean Martin and Jacqueline Bisset. Mm-hmm. They find out that they're having a kid, but they don't know if they want it or not.
And it was Dean Martin's wife that I was thinking of, who was the secretary in the Perry Mason TV show.
Yeah, and now let's talk about the cast. I mean, Burt Lancaster, he has the whole role to himself, and I found out that he actually despised this movie.
Really?
Yeah, he actually thought that this movie was gonna be a bomb.
No kidding. You would never have guessed that because, again, just kind of playing that really good character of being the airport manager.
He has to have everything.
And like really tight, everything is in his control. He is in control of the situation.
Yeah, and there's also Gene Seberg as his assistant.
Mm-hmm.
You can definitely tell there's a little chemistry between them.
There's definitely a strong chemistry, and one, of course, underlying story element for this show, for this movie, was that she was thinking of taking a better paying job at a different airport. I think it was LAX.
Yeah,
I think it was.
and then you have like the guy who's planning on blowing up the plane, Van Heffling,
Mm-hmm.
and you can definitely see. You can definitely feel like the tension he's having because he's
in the hands. It is because of those close-up on the hands.
Yeah, and the woman who plays his wife, Maureen Stapleton, you can tell how concerned she is about her husband.
Very much so, and not just about her husband, but about everyone that he could potentially harm.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, this really set the milestone for the disaster films. And when it comes to the cast, they did a great job. I really enjoyed Helen Hayes as the stowaway.
I did too. That was, I think, very, very entertaining because she was calm as a cucumber and knew how to act while acting. Yeah, those kind of meta acting methods, those four-dimensional acting methods are always so intriguing to me. And they're much more popular now, but back then it was extremely rare.
And it was worth it because this movie actually earned her the Oscar for Best Supporting Actress.
No kidding. Good for her.
Yeah, she was actually nominated alongside with Maureen Stapleton.
Yep. Again, another really iconic role as well. And of course, Petroni, with being played by Kennedy, was my favorite actor in the whole thing because of how he painted the kind of character that he was the one that wrote the book on safety. He was the one that wrote the book on maintenance and planes and knew exactly what everything was capable of and was willing to throw the book out the window because he's the one that wrote it. He's the one that has the authority to throw it out the window and make it happen. With
that in mind, let's talk about the production because they wanted it to be big. I mean, you have a whole airport. You have a whole plane.
Mm-hmm. The plane itself was they actually did do a full reconstruction of the interior of the plane. And I think it was
an old Boeing 707.
707, and it was on display as part of an attraction at Universal for quite some time.
Yeah, and you can tell that they wanted it to be very authentic.
Oh yeah, even going as far as using the Twin Cities airport.
Yeah.
Which is kind of, and they even but unfortunately the weather was too nice. So they had, instead of using real snow, they had to use plastic snow.
Yeah, but still, it was effective.
It was very effective.
And here's the thing, it actually takes place it's supposed to take place in Chicago.
Yeah, no, I've looked it up. The airport that they're referring to, Lincoln Airport, is a real airport that is not even that close to Chicago. It's actually a connecting airport that's supposed to be like for connecting flights that go to O'Hare.
Yeah. And also, when it comes to like the costumes, they were courtesy of the legendary costume designer Edith Head, and you can tell how modern they were, not just for the men, but for the women as well.
Very contemporary for the time. You would not, it looks like an airport in the 1970s. Everybody was wearing the same kind of costumes, same kind of formal dress or semi-formal dress as anybody would in the 1970s.
Yeah. One thing I really enjoyed about this film, the editing.
Oh yeah.
I mean, I really love how they like do the split screens when they're doing like phone conversations and all that stuff.
Uh-huh.
I thought that was very amazing.
Very, very good, but also very common. A lot of TV shows and movies were doing that in the late 60s, early 70s. The Brady Bunch was one of the ones that kind of popularized that split screen action.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to like the conversations you see between Burt Lancaster and his wife, you can definitely tell that there's a bit of tension between them.
Very much so.
Even if they're on two completely different screens.
Yes. Well, that was a good way of conveying the facial expressions of the tension, because a lot of that does have to do with the expression.
Yeah. And also the music, courtesy of the famous composer Alfred Newman. Mm-hmm. He was this was his last film score before he died. And I gotta say, the opening theme, it really just gets you into the tension.
Right. Yes, it really, really does.
It really upbeat. It's like, okay, we're going to be going. This is a busy airport.
And not only that, but as the movie progresses, it's the same general bars that's used for that entire song, but with a different timbre and a different tempo to kind of build the tension.
Yeah. And like I said, this was the last film he scored before he died.
Mm-hmm.
When it came to Airport, it was a big hit at the box office. This was the second highest grossing film in 1970. I think number one was MASH.
Yeah, another really great movie.
Yeah.
One of my favorite movies of all
It
time.
ended up winning. It also received 10 Oscar nominations, including Best Picture. Helen Hayes won for Best Supporting Actress, along with and Maureen Stapleton was nominated. It was also nominated for Best Screenplay, Best Original Score, Best Cinematography, Best Film Editing. And while Maureen Stapleton lost the Oscar, she did win a Golden Globe.
Yeah.
And Alfred Newman, he may have lost the Oscar for original score to the popular movie of that year, Love Story. But he did win a Grammy for the love theme in that movie.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it was all posthumous, by the way.
Oh, okay. Okay. So yeah. Overall, what were some things about the movie that you didn't like?
It wasn't much of a disaster film. I consider it more of like a soap opera.
I wouldn't call it that. I disagree. Because I think it's a disaster. It does fit within the genre of disaster film. The thing is, everyone was so not calm and collected, but knew the situation and knew what they had to do, that you felt that the situation was always going to be handled, even if the worst possible thing happened. You know, so even, everything that could have gone wrong did in this scenario, but they pulled through because of their raw experience.
Yeah, but it's just that when it comes to like all the conversation that are going on, like, between Burt Lancaster and his wife, or like with
Right.
the pilot, Dean Martin, with Jacqueline Bisset, it almost feels like something out of a soap opera.
Well, that was a very popular television show genre of the time. That was in its infancy. That soap operas were kind of in their infancy at the time, and they were very popular. But I definitely get where there are some soap opera elements to it. Honestly, my least favorite part of the movie was when I looked up what airport they used, and it wasn't even mentioned that they were at Chicago until like halfway through the movie.
Yeah.
And then I realized, but I looked up what airport they were using, because obviously they have to use a real airport for authenticity, and it was the Twin Cities Airport. And I'm like, yeah, this is just a stereotypical Midwest Tuesday for us, really. And it's like,
yeah. There's once I also got a few good laughs out of this, especially out of Helen Hayes. But there's one scene that really made me laugh. It was when they were going to land the plane. There's this guy panicking, and then you have the Reverend doing that thing, and then
Yep.
That made me laugh so loud.
Yeah. My favorite scene in this chorus is when they were getting the stuck plane out off the runway. That was my favorite scene. It wasn't so much as a funny scene, but so much as this is going to be a good one. I just enjoyed the tension. It was so good seeing that the raw energy of the Kennedy just piloting the plane, giving it all the beans, and everybody telling him, "Don't do it, get out!" And he's like, "I can't hear you." Just calm as a cucumber, just like heck. Just knew exactly what would happen. He gave off the energy of like, I know every single bolt of this plane. It's going to do exactly as I say. Damned if anybody else says. Okay. And I love that energy. I do. I love that energy.
All in all, what would you give this movie?
Oh, definitely a solid 4.
I'll give it a solid 4 too. This is definitely a must-watch, especially if you're into the disaster genre.
I agree.
I mean, like I said, this was the film that started the disaster film fad of the 70s.
Yeah, and I will say that the one thing is, of course, this movie is back then it was pretty realistic, but nowadays TSA would have prevented like 2/3 of what happened in the movie.
Yeah, I mean, especially with the guy like bringing in a freaking bomb into the plane.
Exactly, like TSA would have flagged him, and he would have been on every single government watch list ever.
It would have been. I mean, it's as dated as it can be, but hey.
For what it is, it's aged pretty well. Special effects are pretty good. The editing's pretty good. Like, for a modern film, it's pretty good.
Yeah, I mean...
It holds up.
Yeah. I, for one, definitely recommend this to anyone who wants to watch it. It's over 2 hours long, but it keeps you guessing what's going to happen next.
It's not that much over 2 hours. We're talking, 2 hours and 10?
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's a good movie. And it's a healthy length, too.
And like I said, I also recommend listening to the music from Alfred Newman, because, my God, that theme is just so catchy.
Mm-hmm.
right. So that was Airport. Now we're going 2 years ahead to 1972 with a film that was produced by what was considered the master of disaster of the 70s, the producer Irwin Allen. Now this is the film that made him the master of disaster. This film, The Poseidon Adventure. At midnight on New Year's Eve, the ocean liner Poseidon ends up being capsized by a tidal wave in the Mediterranean Sea. Now it's up to a reverend to lead a bunch of survivors out of the ship, make it to the top of the ship, or at least the bottom of the ship, so they can find out a way to get out alive. Mm-hmm. This basically set the tone for disaster films for that decade.
And not only just disaster films, but that subgenre of ships as well. You know, a lot of different movies, like Titanic, for example, would set the similar precedent as well.
Yeah, I mean, this film was a really big hit when it came out.
Oh, yes. With a fantastic musical score and also another pretty good cast. Yeah, a lot of familiar faces that you're going to see.
A lot of Oscar winners. I mean, you got Gene Hackman, Ernest Borgnine, Red Button, Shelley Winters, Jack Albertson, a.k.a. Grandpa Joe from Willy Wonka. And it even has Leslie Nielsen. And this was before his iconic comedic role in Airplane.
Even featuring a former Playboy Bunny Centerfold model as well.
Carol Lindley?
Yeah, Carol Lindley.
Yeah. I gotta say, when I first saw this film when I was in high school, and I remember, I still think this film for making me jittery every New Year's Eve.
It would be I would submit that this would be one of the movies I'd be okay with watching around Christmas or around New Year's. This would be one of the movies I would watch.
Yeah. I mean, with the cast, you have Gene Hackman as the lead guy, the Reverend, and he's just gung-ho. He's like, I'm not going to stop. I'm going to get these people out of here.
It's almost a detriment to his character, too, as we see. There's several parts in the film where that conflicts with a lot of the other side characters and main characters.
He also has his belief that God helps those who help themselves.
Exactly. Very much one of those self-help, alternative-styled ministers of the era.
And then you have Ernest Borgnine as the guy who's just following him. You have his wife, played by Stella Stevens. They're newlyweds, and you also have Shelley Winters and Jack Albertson as an old married couple going to Israel.
And, of course, Stella Stevens being this Playboy actress I was referring to. And that, and then, of course, you had Ernest, who was this ex-cop.
Yeah. And then you have Red Buttons as the old single haberdasher. He gets Carol Lindley, the singer, under his wing, and you can definitely see there's a little spark that starts to come between them. And then you have the two kids, Pamela Sue Martin and Eric Shea. Their parents are waiting for them, and they're following the Reverend to get off this ship. They're the only two kids in the whole movie, but you almost want to root for them, especially when it comes to the boy, because he is very smart.
Very, very smart. And, it is kind of forced in that direction because, of course, in a disaster situation, regardless, the women and children are always first. So everyone's like, children, go. And, they push the children ahead in every single scenario. Make sure that they were either, if not first, darn close to being one of the first out.
And I highly doubt they would be the only two kids on that whole ship.
Well, you say that, but the ship was on its way to the scrap heap.
Yeah, that is true.
So
right at the opening, you see the captain played by Leslie Nielsen, and there's a bit of tension between him and the guy who wants to just get it there as soon as possible.
Yes, even in the very beginning of the movie, it's kind of portrayed that the ship's already kind of falling apart and rickety.
Yeah.
I thought it would be a scenario of them just driving it too recklessly, but I was wrong. And I thought that tension was pretty good, and I thought, okay, that's the reason why the ship goes down, is because of this negligence.
Yeah, and also when it comes to the ship in general, they were inspired by the Queen Mary, which you can actually see at Long Beach, California. They even used some interior shots of the ship as well.
Oh yeah. In fact, the RMS Queen Mary is still very much floating and very much in active duty and still doing
one of the last surviving ocean liners of that golden age.
Oh yeah, one of the very last ones, and I think it's going to be for quite some time. I think at this point I wouldn't be surprised if it's one of those ships that becomes a historic landmark.
Yeah. Now, when it comes to the production, they did a great job, especially with the idea of the ship being upside down.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the dining room, the hallways, they all give you that sense of, even the tagline of the movie is hell upside down.
Yes, and a lot of different TV shows and movies would follow a similar formula of the upside down.
And there's so many dangers. You have water, you have fires, you have dead ends.
You have dead ends. You have, I think there's even a poison gas at one point, hot oil and poison gas at one point towards the end.
And there's just so much tension.
Mm-hmm.
You keep guessing like which one of them's gonna get out or which one's not gonna make it.
Mm-hmm.
And there's also, I mean the costumes too. I mean, they were very modern.
Very modern.
But then as they keep going, they get worn and worn.
Yes. Yes, and by the time you get out, you almost forget. By the time you get out, they get out of the boat, and they do get out of the boat. You almost forget that it's the 70s, because they're in these drab clothes now that basically look like they're from that straight out of the Titanic, 1920s, 30s, and then you see this ultra modern helicopter, and it's like, oh right, it's the 70s.
Yeah.
And the boat itself is just really old.
Another thing I love is the cinematography. Did you notice how it always kept tilting?
Yes. So they actually built a special gyroscope for the mount of the camera, specifically to simulate the tilting and the swaying of the boat. And that was all camera work.
And it really adds to the realism.
Yes, it does. They actually built a special apparatus for the camera to do that.
Yeah. Now, when it came to the director, Ronald Neame, he did a great job.
Mm-hmm.
As well as a lot of other guys, too. One thing also with that, there's the music.
Oh my gosh, the music.
The film score, courtesy of John Williams. And this was 3 years before he did Jaws.
Not only that, but one of the biggest hit songs that was in the beginning of the movie.
The Morning After.
The Morning After.
Courtesy of the songwriters Al Kasha and Joel Hirschhorn, who here's the thing. Red Buttons and Shelley Winters would end up being in a movie 5 years later with music from those same guys. Disney's Pete's Dragon.
No kidding.
Yeah. Yeah, those guys did the music for that movie.
But when it comes to the song, The Morning Star.
The Morning After.
The Morning After, actually because of the movie, became a Billboard Hot 100 song. It was #1 in the charts.
Yeah.
It was actually like the hottest song of the year.
And it even ended up earning an Oscar for Best Song.
Yeah, so it was like the song everybody was listening to in 1972, 73, 74.
Yeah. And the visual effects, too. I mean, those miniature shots of the ship going through all those waves at the opening.
I think that some of the special effects were a little poor, especially towards the beginning. Like you have that radar scene where they pan over to the radar and, you have the sea captain looking at the radar. And it's pretty obvious it's just a plastic spinning disc with a light under it.
Surely you can't be serious.
I am dead serious. It looks so fake now. You can tell that all it is just a plastic piece of paper or piece of paper or plastic that's just spinning in circles with a light shining from underneath. You can tell.
Yeah.
Some of the visual effects fall quite short.
Yeah,
even for back then.
Yeah, but still, some of them are really good, especially with the whole capsizing scene.
Oh yeah. The capsizing scene was fantastic.
I mean, you have people falling all over the place. You have things falling like tables, chairs, even a freaking piano.
Oh yeah, the carnage. The carnage early on.
You have a guy falling from the top, falling right into a light fixture.
Yeah, and then you can even see him jolting a little bit as he gets electrocuted.
That's gotta be one of the coolest stunts I've ever seen.
Oh yeah, but back then that was actually a pretty common stunt to do.
And it was worth it. I mean, this film, like I said, it was a huge hit at the box office. It was #2, right behind The Godfather.
Mm-hmm.
It even received 9 nominations at the Oscars, including Best Supporting Actress, Shelley Winters, Best Original Score, Best Costume Design, Best Cinematography. It ended up winning 2. Best Original Song for The Morning After, and an Oscar for Visual Effects.
Mm-hmm.
And while Shelley Winters didn't win for Best Supporting Actress, she did win the Golden Globe.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought she did an awesome job.
Fantastic job.
I mean, she's the old woman who's with her husband. She wants to see her grandson.
Right.
And she's very reluctant at first of going, but she's like,
nope, I'm gonna do this. Yep, she's like, nope, I'm gonna do this. And even towards the end of the movie, even starts to begin to take charge a little bit, especially with the swimming scene where she proclaims, "I was an Olympic swimmer. I won the nationals as a swimmer. Let me do it.
Yeah,
if anybody's gonna make it, it's me."
Yeah, and what I can definitely tell they did a lot. The actors did a lot of their own stunts because they did an awesome job.
Oh yeah.
I mean. Yeah, and like I said, it keeps you guessing, like, which one of them is going to make it out alive and which ones aren't.
Right.
And like I said, we're not doing any spoilers.
I'm keeping my mouth shut. I'm going to say something stupid. So, I've already kind of alluded to what my least favorite parts of the movie were, but what were your least favorite parts of the movie?
That's actually a toughie, because I really enjoyed this movie. Like I said, I remember watching it as far back as when I was a freshman in high school. I was only like 14 when I first saw this, and I really enjoyed it. It also gives me a glimpse of that time of the 70s when my parents were in their preteen years. Mm-hmm. Especially with like the fashion and all that stuff.
I guess from that standpoint, it's an interesting time capsule. Personally, I didn't care for the pacing, especially early on. I felt that the early on pacing was a little rushed. I felt that it definitely needed a little bit more build up to the actual crashing of the boat, of the capsization. I felt that was a little rushed.
Yeah, well, here's the thing.
Because that was pretty early on in the movie.
If you want to talk about pace, think about how fast it would be when they did it in 2 remakes. In 2005, there was a TV movie of the Poseidon Adventure with Adam Baldwin. And then in 2006, there was Warner Brothers did the movie Poseidon, with Kurt Russell, Richard Dreyfuss, Josh Lucas. Personally, I honestly think that gets too much hate.
Well, I do. I mean, but it is a personal preference after all. And of course, another thing I alluded to was one of the things I didn't like was some of the special effects were pretty subpar. Like you could have at least used some stock footage of a genuine radar. That would have been a little better.
Yeah, and I actually found out that this movie even got a sequel, Beyond the Poseidon Adventure, but unfortunately, it bombed. Big time.
Yeah. That's kind of a common theme with a lot of disaster films, as we're going to discuss.
Yeah, by the end of the 70s, they were practically not. They were practically dead.
Yeah,
courtesy of Star Wars.
Well, not only that. Well, that's not the only reason. Star Wars isn't the only reason they're dead, but we'll discuss that with a different movie.
Yeah.
For now, let's just focus on ratings. What would you rate it?
I'll give it a solid 4 out of 5 stars.
I was going to be a little less generous and give it like a solid 3. Again, the tension and the relationship between all the characters was good, but I didn't really care for the pacing that much, and I also felt that some of the effects could have been done a little better.
Well,
but overall, it's a decent movie.
Yeah, and even the American Film Institute liked it. They named it as one of the top 100 most thrilling movies ever made.
Okay.
So that was the Poseidon Adventure. Now we're going to head to 2 years to 1974. And this year is, in my opinion, the peak of the disaster film genre. Mm-hmm. I mean, you had Earthquake, Airport 1975, and the film we're going to be reviewing. Now here's the thing, before I do that. Warner Brothers and 20th Century Fox each had the book right to a book with a story that had like the same idea. One had a book called The Tower, another had a book called The Glass Inferno. Irwin Allen comes in and's like, why don't we combine them together into one epic disaster film? With that, we get The Towering Inferno, directed by John Guillermin, released by both 20th Century Fox and Warner Brothers. Mm-hmm. In San Francisco, the world's tallest skyscraper, the Glass Tower, is set to open. Unfortunately, due to faulty wiring, it ends up starting a fire that starts spreading throughout the entire building. Now it's up to the architect and the chief of the fire department to work together to get the survivors out before they end up engulfed by the flames. Mm-hmm. And this film was a huge hit.
Well, it has to be if you're gonna be putting Paul Newman and
Steve McQueen.
Steve McQueen in it, two of the like most legendary actors of the 1970s. If this movie didn't do well, I think there'd be several studios that would be setting themselves on fire.
Yeah, and I gotta say, when I first saw this, I really thought this was awesome.
Yeah. So, as with a lot of the movies that we do, this was my first time watching it. You know, and I was gobsmacked with how good it was.
I mean, when it comes to like the cast and the effects
and the set design was absolutely perfect.
I mean, and like I said, there were some big names. I mean, you had Steve McQueen, Paul Newman, William Holden, Faye Dunaway, Fred Astaire, Jennifer Jones, even O.J. Simpson.
Yeah, just an absolute superstar cast for a superstar movie.
Heck, it even had one of the kids that was one of the Brady Bunch boys.
Yep.
And when it comes to Steve McQueen and Paul Newman, they really work together as a team.
They do, even though that they're kind of on opposing ends for a little bit. There is a little attention, you know, the fire chief kind of being kind of mad that an architect doesn't really take safety and fire safety as a high priority, and the architect going, well, it's not just my fault, I just designed the building.
Yeah,
I told them that I over-engineered the thing originally, and people just cut corners.
Yeah, I mean, the guy responsible is really the guy who plays William Holden's son-in-law.
The slime ball. I have him in my notes as the slime ball. Because he's a slime ball.
Yeah, I mean, you can tell that he was doing everything he can to to keep as much money as possible from being...
Not just that, but also being really disrespectful to his wife, his boss, everyone. He's a slime ball.
He practically just hates his father-in-law because he keeps comparing his wife to him.
As a daughter and father, yeah. And not only that, but really wants to prove that he is his own independent person, wants to be rid of the Simmons name because married into the family and adopted the Simmons last name.
The Duncans, you mean?
Yeah. Yeah, Duncan Simmons.
Yeah, and then you have Faye Dunaway as Paul Newman's girlfriend, and they definitely have some great chemistry.
Great chemistry, similar plot line to Airport.
Yeah. But if there's one love story I loved in this, it was Fred Astaire and Jennifer Jones. Fred Astaire plays a con man who's trying to give fake insurance to a widow, and they really connect, even if she knows that he's lying.
It wasn't insurance; it was stock.
Oh yeah, that's right. And I just love those two. I mean.
It's definitely a minor plot point. It's a very, very minor plot point throughout the movie. You almost don't even notice it until like the actual ends, until like towards the climax of the film, when he fully admits, I'm a con man. What do you say to that? And she's like, don't care.
And Fred Astaire, I mean, this was one of the few films he did that did involve singing and dancing.
No kidding. Okay.
Well, think about this. This was a disaster film. It's not a musical like all the ones he did like back in the 30s.
That's true. I just didn't.
Yeah.
I never really put two and two together.
And then you have William Holden as the main builder of the building. He's the guy in charge, and you can tell that he's suddenly feeling such guilt of not listening to the chief of the fire department.
Yeah, a lot of different people were wearing a lot of guilt towards the end of the movie, except the electrician, the slime ball.
What electrician?
That was the son-in-law. He was the head electrician for the building.
Don't make this a running gag. Well, along with that, there's also like I said, there's even O.J. Simpson. He's in charge of like the technical stuff.
Yeah, I think he's the chief security.
Yeah, and then there's you have Robert Vaughn as the senator who's visiting, Jack Collins as the mayor of San Francisco with his wife, played by Irwin Allen's future wife Sheila. And then you have the guy that's basically in charge of the whole opening ceremony, Robert Wagner. And you can see that he has a spark with a secretary played by Susan Flannery. And you even have one of the big singers of that decade, Maureen McGovern, singing the main song for this movie, "We May Never Love Like This Again," made by the same guys who did The Morning After, El Casha and Joel Hirschhorn. And just like the Poseidon Adventure, The Towering Inferno owed those guys another Oscar for Best Song.
Yep. Yeah, it's actually the whole soundtrack. It wasn't just one song either. The entire soundtrack itself was a huge hit in stores. You know, people were actually going out to buy. Like, this was one of the few soundtracks, like Back to the Future, where they were pressing it on vinyl and selling it.
And John Williams came back to score this film, and personally, in my opinion, this has got to be his most underrated film score.
Mm-hmm.
Because it really gives you that sense of adventure, action, drama.
Yes, a lot of that. And, of course, my favorite parts of the movie were just the fact that they got a whole skyscraper to be built up.
Well,
right?
not a full-size one.
No, it is the 555 San Francisco. That is the building.
Yeah.
That is the building they used for the movie, was the 555 San Francisco.
Well, for the bottom parts, but then they used like a 100-foot tall model for like the exterior shots
Yes.
of the tower.
Yes, but the 555 San Francisco was the second tallest building west of the Mississippi at the time.
And
so it was a good sized building that they
Yeah.
could play up as this massive building.
Now you
And
said
the
that
set
you
design.
now you said they really enjoyed the sets, and I
Oh
can definitely
my
see
gosh.
why. They practically scream mid-1970s.
Not just mid-1970s, but high-end mid-1970s, with just the really advanced control boards in every single major lobby. The advance of using the phone systems, and even the computer. They even had like a full-scale server computer room to deal with literally everything, from the security to the management of the building, just everything. You could definitely tell that this was a really advanced building that was cutting edge for the time.
And what was also cutting edge was special effects, because my
Oh,
God,
yes.
the fire effects in this movie are still incredible.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the stunt people, they do their job awesome.
Yes, very gruesome deaths too. There are some very, very gruesome deaths throughout the movie.
And yeah, I mean, like I said, even the exterior shots of the tower, you almost forget that it's a 100-foot tall model.
Yeah.
They make it look like it is a full-scale 1,100-foot building, and I mean, it's just incredible. It sucks that it wasn't even nominated for visual effects that year. Earthquake won it, because back then they did like special achievement awards for visual effects.
Well, I think Earthquake cheated. They used rumble seats in theaters. Okay, you can't replicate that on a home video system. Whereas with Inferno, you can at least enjoy it in its entirety, in its full,
Yeah.
video. And again, the cinematography is also, bar none, one of the best out there.
I mean, and also when it comes to the editing as well, I mean, especially with that final scene when they have those water tanks blow up, bore the water down into the building, and then you're like, okay, this is happening, you never know which.
I think that was actually, even though it is like the climax of the movie, I think that was the movie's weakest point with visual effects. And I can get into it a little bit, because it is kind of production, kind of opinion. But you can tell that a lot of the flame was just turned off. Not put out by fire, but just turned off, because once the water was done pouring, the fire just mysteriously turned off, like it was a gas burner that was causing it.
I guess I can see that.
Some of the scenes where the fire was being put out weren't really done that well.
Yeah. One thing I loved about this movie, they actually cooperated with the San Francisco Fire Department.
Oh yeah, they both in the beginning and the end of the movie, they had a special commemoration for the San Francisco Fire Department.
Not just for
but
right
for all
at the,
firefighters.
Yeah, I mean, right at the opening, it's like this picture was dedicated to the firefighters of the world.
Yes, because this was in a time when this is the 1970s, and I guess this is going to be another kind of herring point of one of its other weak points is how poorly the movie aged, kind of. Because at the end, you have Steve McQueen talking to the architect, Paul Newman, and, you know, saying, you know, with these buildings getting higher and higher and everything, you got really lucky with only 200 people, with the 200 people, only 200 casualties. The next one could be 10,000, which...
And even to this day, there are still buildings set on fire,
Well,
a lot of people getting killed.
That really did age well, because back then there wasn't that many disasters with buildings. But then, of course, I don't have to say what kind of disaster happened in the early 2000s that really was approaching those numbers of casualties.
I know what you're talking about.
And you know, back then in the 70s, that was when the towers were getting constructed, and there really wasn't that much consideration for fire safety at the time. Because and it was Inferno that kind of planted the seed of saying, hey, maybe we should like really overbuild these buildings and make sure they can withstand literally everything. A lot of people didn't listen, and you know, it's kind of an irony. The movie is kind of ironic in a way, because a lot of the subliminal messaging ended up being kind of not followed, and we eventually learned the hard way, unfortunately.
Yeah. Well, when it comes to the Towering Inferno, it was a huge hit. It was
Very
number
much.
one at the box office of 1974. It earned 8 nominations at the Oscars, including Best Picture, Best Supporting Actor, Fred Astaire, Best Original Score. It lost most of its nominations to the big winner that year, The Godfather Part 2.
Mm-hmm.
But it did receive 3. Best Song for We May Never Love This Again. It also won for Best Cinematography and Best Film Editing. Fred Astaire lost the Oscar to Robert De Niro, but he did win a Golden Globe.
Yeah. Can I have permission to say one spoiler?
What?
The cat lived. Just saying. That's my one spoiler for this episode. I'll do one spoiler a week. What's next week's spoiler? You'll never know. I wrote next week's episode. Anyways, go on.
Yeah. Yeah, this was like the peak of disaster films of the 1970s. And it really knocked out of the park.
What was your least favorite part of the movie?
I wouldn't say I hated any of this. I really enjoyed it. In fact, when it comes to ratings, I'm giving this a solid 4 out of 5 stars.
4 out of 5.
Because I really, really enjoyed this.
I'm actually going to be a little more generous. Out of all the 4 movies we're talking about, this one's my favorite. No, actually, Airport's my favorite. I'll give it, you know what? Fine, I'll give it a 4. I was going to say 4.5, but the fire being put out was my least favorite scene. That knocked it down a peg.
Yeah, well, this is definitely a must-watch if you're a fan of disaster films.
Very much so.
Yeah. And I got to give Irwin Allen credit for using that idea of combining 2 books into one big story.
Not only that, but there's much more that can be talked about with the drama of that, because there is that deserves its own tangent. But
yeah, well, we only have a few minutes. We don't have much time for that kind of stuff now,
yes.
do we?
Yeah, no, it's time to move on.
So that was The Towering Inferno. Now we're going ahead to 1977 with the last film of our reviews. Now this film, in my opinion, was one of the last great disaster films of that decade. Because after that, it would start going downhill, courtesy of the biggest film of that year, Star Wars. I mean, after this, it was Star Wars all over the place. And this was, in my opinion, a very underrated film. It's actually a sequel to the movie Airport. It was one out of 3 sequels. This was the 3rd one. First, before that, there was Airport 1975 with Charlton Heston, Karen Black. Now, there's Airport 77, released by Universal. A millionaire's private plane is headed to Palm Beach. Unfortunately, it is hijacked by art thieves and ends up crashing in the Bermuda Triangle. Now the pilot has to do all he can to get the survivors out of the plane before they drown. And I really enjoyed this film.
I didn't really enjoy it that much. I'm gonna be honest. You summarized the entire movie, right there. I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's talk a little bit about the production value of this movie.
Well, let's talk about the cast.
Yeah.
The cast was pretty good. You had Jack Lemmon as the lead pilot.
Mm-hmm.
You had Brenda Vaccaro as his girlfriend.
Mm-hmm.
And then you had some other big stars like Olivia de Havilland, Lee Grant, Christopher Lee as her husband. I mean, Christopher Lee, if you guys are Lord of the Rings fans, that's Saruman right there. And if you're Star Wars fans, that's Count Dooku in his younger years.
Yeah, I didn't even recognize Christopher Lee until you pointed that out because I'm horrible with
Yeah.
names.
And then you also have James Stewart as the millionaire. And George Kennedy comes back as Petroni.
Yes, the only recurring character in the entire movie, actually.
Yeah.
And it's a very minor role too. It's very, very minor.
Yeah, compared to the first Airport movie. Personally, I really enjoyed the cast. I mean, I thought that, when it comes to Jack Lemmon, like the Reverend in the Poseidon Adventure, he just wants to get the job done. He wants to do all he can to get the people out of there before they drown.
Yes, no, the casting was a fairly good option. Everybody had their roles. Everybody knew what was going on.
Yeah.
And I want to talk a little bit about the set design too with the airplane. Again, exact same story as the original Airport, where they completely reconstructed an interior of a Boeing.
Of 747.
And they actually had it out on display for a while and was part of an attraction at Universal's, just like the first one.
Yeah, here's the thing. People could actually make like home movies with that set.
Yeah, and there are some really cool, interesting little things about the set. Like, for example, they had this Laserdisc player, which back then was a very new technology. I think Laserdisc would premiere the following year to the public eye.
Yeah. And then you had the kids playing Pong.
Again, another very, very ultra luxurious plane that literally had all the fixings. And of course, another really cool factoid about the production was that a lot of the scenes that were from the Navy, a lot of it's stock footage. But here's another interesting thing about it. In the TV release of it, there was an additional 80 minutes of naval scenes for the movie.
You gotta wonder why they had to cut them out in the first place.
Most likely due to the fact that this was also, I think, one of the first films that used 77 mil. I think it was literally that they just couldn't fit it on a typical camera, on a typical projector in a theater. I think it was literally a space constraint.
I would have loved to have seen the extended version just to see what it looked.
Yeah, I think it was exclusive to television though, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But the Navy, a lot of the equipment that that was used in the movie was genuine safety equipment and rescue equipment that the Navy used at the time.
And rescue procedures in general.
Yeah, it was
right at the end of the movie. It says like even if the accident is fictional,
everything was by the book.
Yeah.
Everything was by the book.
Yeah. Now, when it comes to the cast, there's one character that was a bit weird. It was Lee Grant. You could tell that. When it comes to her and Christopher Lee, you can tell that they're not a happy couple.
No.
Lee Grant is drinking a lot. She's always
trying to blackmail other people on the plane at one point.
Her name's even Karen.
Yeah. Sorry, Grandma. She watches this,
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure nowadays she'd be considered a Karen.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, there were some other cast members that were that too. You have the guys that are setting up the whole plot to hijack the plane
and steal all the important artwork.
Yeah, and they have it planned to the T. They have a sleeping gas. Mm-hmm. They have gas masks.
Again, another scenario where TSA guidelines would really come in handy and just debunk the whole thing.
But here's the thing: compared to Airport, this is a private plane.
No matter.
Yeah, and it was also an experimental plane as well.
Yes, that's another thing too. It was an experimental plane.
When it comes to the interior of the plane, it was definitely very modern. I really thought it actually gave me sort of like a cozy feeling to it. Like
it was the experimental part was how luxurious it was supposed to be. A Laserdisc player and Pong on a plane. Most 99% of houses didn't have either of those things, let alone both. And then you had it on a plane.
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
In 1977, yeah. But
Let's also talk about the special effects. I thought they were actually really good.
Oh no, the special effects are fantastic.
And this was the same year as Star Wars and Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
Yes, it was a very, very good special effects. Very, very typical. Very, very used a lot of the same underwater and a lot of the same cinematography strategies as other other contemporary films. So nothing groundbreaking by any stretch of the imagination. But again, still very good.
The visual effects were courtesy of a guy named Albert Whitlock. He actually won an Oscar a few years earlier for a film version of the Hindenburg.
Yes.
He actually built a miniature Hindenburg, and you can actually see it at the Smithsonian in the Air and Space Museum. And I gotta say, when it comes to like the effects with the plane underwater, it definitely gives you that sense of like, okay, they're in danger.
They're in danger, but I didn't get the sense that they were in that much danger because it's a pretty shallow water.
But here's the thing: there's also pressure building in, and they could all drown just like that.
They could. There was a little bit of urgency in that matter. But as soon as I saw Petroni hit the scene, I'm like, okay, everything's fine.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, but Petroni, just from the original airport, you know if he's going to be on the scene, knows exactly how much time they have before that plane gives, and that they were going to exhaust every possibility before that plane gives, and they did.
Yeah, I mean, and also when it comes to like the cast, I mean, Olivia de Havilland, I mean, she was like one of the last adult actors to serve. She was a legend. I mean, think about it. She started as far back as Gone with the Wind. She died back in 2020 at 104.
Whoa, that's how long I want to live for.
Yeah, and when it comes to the costumes, they were again done by Edith Head. And like I said, very modern.
Very Edna mode. You know, of course, everything was just on point when it comes to set design and costume design and music as well. Music was also done very well. I really liked the I really liked the music as well. It was pretty good and did a good job illustrating the intensity of the movie. There was one part of the soundtrack I didn't like, and that was when the blind guy was playing that one song.
Tom Sullivan. He was a very popular singer at that time.
Yeah, not my style.
Well, anyway, when it comes to just the movie in general, I enjoyed it. I mean, it kept me guessing what was going to happen next, what people are going to make it out in one piece, what people were not. And actually, even though this wasn't like one of the top 10 biggest films that year, it was still a financial success.
Yeah, I think so, but I think that the movie itself recycles a lot of the secondary story arc elements to it. We mentioned how there's a a romance between the main captain and one of the stewardess, but it's also worth mentioning that the stewardess was thinking about taking a job somewhere else in a faraway place, and they want to have a relationship, but they're not sure if it's going to work.
Yeah.
We've seen that story arc twice already this time around. That's already been exhausted twice.
And when it comes to like the whole underwater thing, I mean, this is basically the Poseidon Adventure in a plane.
Exactly, and it's not even. There isn't that much tension, in my opinion, as with Poseidon. With Poseidon, they're moving around and navigating obstacles, but you're not really seeing that. You're just seeing one guy who's just like, okay, here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna take this buoy. We're gonna go up. I'm gonna flag down a ship with a radio, and then we're gonna come get the plane.
And
I'm sorry, but that doesn't have much blood. There isn't that much action to it. There isn't that much tension as in the other three films.
Yeah, and here's the thing. They're stuck in the Bermuda Triangle.
They could have done way more with that. They could have done way more with being stuck in the Bermuda. Throw a storm in. Something, but no, it was a pretty mundane rescue mission. In my opinion, and compared to the other three movies, it was pretty mundane. Because after the plane crashed and was hijacked and all the hijackers died, spoilers, there isn't that much to it after that. There isn't that much meat in the bones to really get excited for.
Well, I guess I can't argue with that.
You know, it's one of the reasons why Rotten Tomatoes, I think, gave it like a 4.x out of 10. It was not critically acclaimed. Like, it was
Yeah.
not, like, it was a good movie. It was profitable, and it had its fair share of awards, which we'll discuss.
It was nominated for 2 Oscars, Best Art Direction and Best Costume Design. Take a wild guess of what movie beat them.
I'm gonna say that for both of them, it was Smokey and the Bandit.
Star Wars.
Darn! I always say Smokey and the Bandit because it was number 2. Anyways, and it's always a wild card play. No, yeah, that's another reason too why it failed so hard. It not only had Star Wars to contend with, but Smokey and the Bandit. You know,
Yeah.
two iconic pillars in pop culture.
Yeah, and like I said, in my opinion, this was the last good disaster film, because after this, it started going downhill. Next,
Yeah.
you know, they're having these crazy ones, like Errol and Allen did this movie called The Swarm with killer bees. Next thing you know, there's another sequel, The Concorde, Airport 79, and that bombed big time.
Snakes on a Plane.
No, that was the 2000s.
Oh. Okay. But yeah, but you
But
can
this was
definitely-
basically like the last good disaster film before of the 70s.
But even when you take that into consideration, you can definitely tell with this movie that they definitely dropped the bar considerably. You know, they definitely dropped the bar compared to the other earlier disaster films.
But that doesn't mean that it's bad. I mean, it could have been worse.
I still don't think it's really worth the time watching, though, because it's less than 2 hours and it doesn't really have that much meat on it.
Personally, I think you should watch it at least once, just to see what it's like.
If you're really into the disaster film genre, sure. But
Yeah.
just at a film base level today, would you go and watch it? I wouldn't.
So what would you give this film then?
2.0.
I'll give it like maybe a 3.5.
You know, I really genuinely think that this movie, it's not like it's bad. Like, in my opinion, if you're into disaster film genre or you just like older films, it's the kind of movie where you can just put it on and do laundry in the back and have it on in the background while you do laundry or something. It's really of a nothing burger of a movie in my opinion, because the writing itself, I feel, is a little lazy.
Well, like I said, it could have been worse. And like I said, this is basically when disaster films started going down the toilet.
Yeah, I would say that if you want to look at like the best of the best, it would be the original Airport from 1970 and the Tower Inferno. But if you want to look at where things start to go wrong, you look at this movie, Airport 77. This is where things start to go wrong.
Yeah. So that was our take on those movies. So when it comes to the disaster films in general, I mean, like I said, it was a fad of that time, and maybe someday in the future it'll happen again.
It did happen once already in the 90s. We saw a resurgence with remake of Twister and Titanic in the late 90s. So we did see another resurgence of disaster-esque films in the late 90s, early 2000s. And I wouldn't be surprised if we're due again within the next 10 years.
Yeah. So when it comes to our next episode, we're getting ready for Halloween. So we're going to be dealing with a lot of cool movies that deal with robots.
Yeah, we're going to be, what's better, man or machine? I'm looking forward to this.
Yeah, well, spoiler alert, one of the movies isn't Star Wars.
No, it's not.
I mean, that's basically a robot movie on a whole nother level.
Next week, though. We'll discuss that next time.
Yeah, well, until then, I'm Chris Wyatt.
And I'm Jacob.
And thank you very much for watching Chris's Classic Cinema. We hope to see you again next time.